Do you refute the fact that South Sudan is one of the most corrupt countries in the world?
Well, corruption is all over the world.
Well, first of all, I would want to correct because when people talk about corruption, it has to be something tangible. For us, our government has been fighting corruption since before the independence.
Hello, everyone. Welcome again to Kurthi TV. For those of you who have not subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe to support the channel, and also make sure you click the the bell button so that you get notified when I post a video. Also share the content so that it reaches a wider audience. So this video is about the corruption allegations that have been brought against the Minister of Information, Michael Makuei, by Bol Agau. Bol, he's a member of parliament in South Sudan's transitional government. So this is what he said on September 16th on the floor of parliament. So I'll play it, but then after that I'll go back to give a context, and then I'll come back to the accusations, and I need to address what he said, and also give the context in terms of what we can credit to him. There's some things I think maybe we need to look critically at what he's saying, what the role of Michael Makuei is, and also Ngor, who's also been implicated in this, because there's some documents that have come to light and they've raised some questions. So before I talk about the corruption allegations, and I'll show you the documents and what they mean, but I also contextualize them.
The Executive Director in the Office of the Minister of Information, Telecommunication and Postal Services addressed a letter to the Undersecretary of the Ministry requesting $125,000 to pay for the funeral rites and burial of the daughter of the Minister for Information, Telecommunication and Postal Services. This money was approved the same day, and it was paid, one, by the South Sudan International Gateway, a subsidiary, a body that is generating revenue for the country, and it should go to NRA.
Order.
Right, Honorable Speaker, not only that, I have a lot of evidence, including the land of the government being hired out, and the money goes to individuals within the Ministry of Information, Telecommunication and Postal Services.
I'll come back to what he said about the documents. He's saying I'm going to show some of the documents. But before I do that, I need to give a wider context, because corruption in South Sudan is not something new. It's something that we know has been happening since 2005. For those of you who know, the first auditing by the Auditor General was released in 2012. The first auditing, public auditing. Let me play a couple of clips, and I'll also read to you some quotes that will give you some context about corruption in South Sudan before I actually analyze what the accusations against Michael Makuei are. Here is Hilda Johnson writing in her book, South Sudan, The Untold Story, From Independence to Civil War. So it was published in 2016. As one could expect, freedom fighters who had spent most of their lives in the struggle were not necessarily the ones best prepared for the task of taking over the semi-autonomous government of Southern Sudan in 2005. Although many had been governing liberated areas, these were still military administrations and not political governments based on at least some principles of the rule of law. In addition, corruption and nepotism soon prevented the building of stronger and more effective institutions. So this is the nature of institutions in South Sudan between 2005 and 2011, when South Sudan became independent. So this is something that is systemic. Now, the second quote I'm going to read to you is from Alex Duval. And I usually don't like much of what Alex Duval rights because he's condescending. He has these supremacist ideas. But there's something he said in one of his articles. When kleptocracy becomes insolvent, root causes of civil war in South Sudan. So this is what he says about corruption and the leaders of South Sudan. Much of the national wealth was simply stolen or recycled into a patronage system. Meanwhile, donors and international financial institutions worked under the misapprehension that corruption was an abuse of the system and that the SPLM leadership genuinely intended to build working institutions. In fact, corruption is the system. Kiir's main instrument of governance was permitting members of the elite to join the kleptocratic club. He was at the top of the system, but not in control of it. And as he later noted, once there's corruption, there's insecurity. Now you can see corruption is not something that is new and not something that is about individuals. It is something that is systemic. So, and this is something I need to say before I say something about the allegations. Now, also, here are some clips about corruption in 2018 when the Enough Project released its case about corruption in South Sudan and how systemic it was and how it has gone from something that was somehow centralized to something that is disintegrated because the money became scarce, but some individuals were enriching themselves. So this is an interview with Gordon Boy in 2018 on Voice of America. So let's listen to the clips.
Well, a recent investigative report alleges there is massive and endemic corruption in South Sudan. A report by the Washington-based Enough Project also says competitive corruption surrounding control of resources, particularly among military actors, has been a defining feature of South Sudan's system. Now, corruption has now shifted from being an integrated and self-sustaining system during the country's very brief economic boom period to being a disintegrative and self-destructive system.
As you can see, corruption is something that is systemic. It is something that is destroying South Sudan as we know.
As far as you know, what has the government been doing to stop the bleeding of this country, the corruption that is crippled South Sudan, which is benefiting both people who have now been in the opposition and even those in government?
The question is an interesting question, and listen to how he responds to it.
Well, first of all, I would want to correct because when people talk about corruption, it has to be something tangible. For us, our government has been fighting corruption since before the independence.
That's not true. South Sudan has not been fighting corruption. One of the things the president and the administration has been doing was to talk against corruption. So the president would talk about people who are corrupt. He would castigate some individuals or talk to in terms of generalities. But I don't think there was any streamlined system that was put in place to ensure that people who are corrupt are persecuted. So when he says that South Sudan has been fighting corruption since independence, that's not entirely true.
But you cannot just talk about corruption. The Central Report has a lot of weaknesses.
Yeah.
Number one, there are people they name and then they cannot prove the allegations. For example, they name some leaders that they have looted money, they have houses, but even those reports were challenged. First of all, they cannot prove.
Here's the problem. He's saying that the allegations have been labeled against some officials in the government of South Sudan. But he's saying there are no proofs. So that means if you cannot prove something, then it didn't happen. So we know corruption exists, but he's looking for proofs. So if people are stealing money, but no one has the proof, then that's not a problem to South Sudan. That is something that is really, really scary.
You make a good point. It's a question of proof, and what you're saying, as long as somebody cannot prove something, then perhaps it's not happening. Truth is, across the continent of Africa, in also many countries where there's corruption, it is known that those who have access to power also have access to the purse. It is about stealing public finances. It's about being able to take away money that was meant for development. And many times, actually, it's the people in power who have access. Would you deny that actually government officials in South Sudan have stolen money that belongs to the public? Would you say all servants of the government of South Sudan or people or the politicians are clean people, they don't steal from the public?
What he says is really crucial, because the moment you have access to the people in leadership, then you have access to resources if you're connected. So he cannot deny that. And his response now will show that, because he knows this is true, but he wants to deflect. So, and this will come back to what Bol said, and also how Mading is implicated in something Bol thinks is corruption. And I'll address that later. But let us look at his response to the question about whether just because there are no proofs, then there's no corruption. But he's going to blame the system, which is very interesting for Golden Boy.
Well, what I'm saying, I'm just reiterating the position of our government.
Yeah.
I think you remember in 2011, our president came out and said that there are, because of the weak institutions, there were money that were not accounted for. But that one doesn't mean that there are individuals to be targeted that they have stolen money.
Yeah.
You know, before even we became independent, after now, we have very weak institutions.
Yes.
So we don't even, if you look at the states, there are states where people are being paid in cash because there are no banking system.
Yes.
Our banking system is the Kenyan banks, and then they are not in everywhere. You will find them in Juba. So the modern way of doing business is not yet...
so there are loopholes in the system which can facilitate corruption.
Yes.
In essence, stealing of government public funds.
But when people talk about the stealing, it's a different issue. Because when you said about the stealing, it means that somebody taking a large chunk of money for his private use. That one has to be proven.
There is evidence that money has been taken.
Okay. So what he said is really, really also crucial. There are loopholes within the system that are being exploited. And also, he made a distinction between using money for private use. So this is going to be crucial in my analysis of corruption against Michael Makuei. Because if you take public money, what is the money being used for? So that's really, really crucial in context of implication of Mading and his assistance that was provided him by the Ministry of Information. So that sort of gives us some sort of a general context, because it is very easy to lose. It's very easy to lose sight of the wider context, because when we hear some things in South Sudan and then we go onto the social media, we really have this parochial way of looking at things, and then we take it as if what has been stated is the truth. But the wider context is lost sight of. And this is really crucial. Now, this is where I'm going back to what Bol Agau said, because I think Bol has something fundamental. He's started, and I think if he follows this through, not just one case, but other cases, then I think he's onto something. And I think this is the direction toward which we want South Sudan to go, where public officials are held accountable. But I also need to also hold them accountable, because I think there's also a question, because we've seen how corruption is widespread, and I'll come back to that. Now, the documents he was talking about in the audio I played at the beginning, there are very many. I'm not going to show all of them, but I'm going to show a few because they are really crucial to what I'm about to say. The first document, which you can see now, is dated August 16, 2022, and it was written by the executive director, Nyal Chagaimate, who is the executive director in the office of the Minister of Information. And it's addressed to Dr. Lado Wani, who is the undersecretary. So it's requesting financial assistance of $125,000 to assist the family of the minister with the cost of the funeral rites of the daughter of the minister who passed away in South Sudan. So, and this is one of the documents that is being used, because the money, this is the private event, and the public funds are being used to cover a personal cost. Now we have to be really empathetic, because this is someone who was briefed, so we cannot be callous in how we say it. But at the end of the day, this is public money. Now the question that we can raise from here is, what is the general protocol in terms of the money? The question is not the money has been requested. The question is, where is the money coming from? And if the money was taken from previously allocated fund for the same purposes, is this something that is given to all of the employees within the ministry, that if a family member passed away, then they can have access to that fund? That is one of the things. Where is the funding coming from? Is it something everyone has access to, or is it because this is the daughter of the minister? This is where the question is. Where's the money coming from? So we can say, if we say individually, that's a corruption, but we've seen that corruption is endemic. So if this is something everyone else in South Sudan is doing, then it's difficult to make a case against one minister when it's happening. That is not to say that the minister himself, as part of the system, is not corrupt. Because as he said in the video I'm going to play shortly, is that South Sudan is part of the world.
South Sudan is part of the world, so it cannot be free of corruption.
I'm asking you on a scale whether South Sudan is up there as one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
South Sudan is one of the corrupt countries in the world, not the most.
Are you corrupt?
Me? No, I'm not corrupt.
That South Sudan is corrupt, but he says he's not corrupt, which is not true, because if he's part of a corrupt system and he does things clearly like the people in the system, then he's corrupt. But if we picked him out of that system and accuse him of corruption when the other people within the system that are also corrupt, then the questions come back to Bol. Why Michael Makuei? Why another people? This is where Bol has to answer that. What criterion did he use to pick Makuei as opposed to other people? The video I played to you in 2018 from Why was talking about the whole system, and he does acknowledge, the president acknowledges that. So why Michael Makuei? That doesn't mean Makuei is not corrupt, because the whole system was corrupt. So that's one document. The second document is dated February 24, 2021. It is addressed to Engineer Papita Okwachi. He's the executive director of what they call South Sudan International Gateway. So requesting a sum of $75,905 and for covering the cost of furniture and electronics for the office of the deputy minister. So the actual furniture and electronics were purchased in July of 2020, and the funding is being requested in 2021. Now, here's the question. The Gateway collects some money on behalf of the government. So that money should actually go to the finance ministry so that the money can be used in the government. But if the money goes directly to the Ministry of Finance, then is the money only used within the Ministry of Information, or is it also going to the Minister of Finance? That's what we don't know. But for those of you who don't know what South Sudan International Gateway is, let me read to you what Michael Makuei said when it was formed. The new international gateway we are launching is a public-private partnership with international partners experienced in telecommunication that includes shared revenue agreement with the government and also promotion of low-cost and quality voice and data traffic to the world. So it's a partnership between the private and the public, and it will generate revenue. So here's another information. So basically, an international gateway is a telephone number through which calls are routed to get cheaper rates on international long distance charges or to make calls through voice over IP networks internationally. So that means there's some revenue that is generated for South Sudan. Now, we would expect that these funds doesn't just go to the Ministry of Information, even if this was facilitated by the Ministry of Information. The funds belongs to South Sudan, so it should go to the Ministry of Finance, and it can be used for any other ministry. If it is agreed by the government of South Sudan that the money that comes from the gateway, international gateway, should only be used within the Ministry of Finance, then that should be stipulated completely, and it should be clear from the government, especially from the Ministry of Finance. So one of the things Bol is saying is that the money that's being collected by the international gateway goes to individuals. And you can see the letter I'm going to read to you from a request from Ngor, who is the host of Fixing South Sudan. The money that the minister approved actually comes directly from the gateway. This is where the problem is. So here's the letter. So the request from Ngor was on October 29, 2019. So addressed to the Minister of Finance, Michael Makuei. So this is what he said. I write to bring to your esteemed attention the pitiable case of Fixing South Sudan, a flagship show on SSBC. The program has been broadcasting public interest programming for the past 3 years without material or financial contribution from SSBC or its mother ministry. Since Fixing South Sudan informs and educates citizens and policymakers on nation-building issues on a weekly basis, it deserves support to spur the show's efforts towards peace and confidence building. The funds will support 5 months operations for the show, as well as sponsor the host of Fixing South Sudan show to attend an 8 weeks training course on TV presenting using mega broadcasting studios of South African Broadcasting Corporation in Johannesburg, as per the attached letter of acceptance. So there were two things. That there was something the Fixing South Sudan and Mading were doing for the public, so they were requesting support. Now, so that was on October 29, 2019. Then, on February 24, 2021, so the minister sent a letter to Papiti, who is the executive director of South Sudan International Gateway. Remember, South Sudan International Gateway collects funds because of the use of international number. So there are charges that come for the use of the number. So the money that goes to the ministry goes to the Ministry of Information. I'm not sure whether there's part that goes to the Ministry of Finance. So, but Makuei here, the ministry is directly requesting funds from the director of the gateway, directly from the gateway. So we would expect that the money goes to the Minister of Finance. If the minister requests some money for any, private or contractual agreements with any private companies, then the money should be within the budget of the Ministry of Finance. The money from South Sudan Gateway should go to the Ministry of Finance, and it should benefit all ministries. Now, you would think that the Ministry of Finance of Information can have contract with anyone as long as it benefits the ministry and South Sudanese. But the problem here is not that the money is being given to Dolku. I think Dolku, I think the name is now Terab, but it's called Dolku Company Limited. It's now Terab. It's no longer Dolku. There's nothing wrong with the ministry contracting private companies. The problem is where the money coming from. The money comes from the gateway. So that's where the problem is. So the gateway is collecting money for the ministry, and the ministry goes directly to them. That's where the problem is. Because the ministry should have budget coming from the Ministry of Finance. So the Ministry of Information should have a budget coming from Ministry of Finance when the annual budget is allocated to ministries. The money that's allocated to the ministry should be the money that is used for any contractual obligations within the ministry. So it should have funds that are allocated for contractual agreements with any private communication companies. So when those companies apply, then that money is already there. But when the minister gets the money from South Sudan Gateway directly, the question is the Minister of Finance aware of it? And what is the protocol? That's where the problem is. And I think that's where Bol is right. But as we know, is there a system? There's a whole system. As you can see, there were 3 phases. Phase 1, which is $158,000. Phase 2, which is $94,800. And then the phase 3, which is $63,000. So a total of $316,000. I want to say a number of things about this in context of Mading, because I think it generated a lot of vitriol on the social media. People were insulting one another, that Michael Makuei is corrupt, or Mading is benefiting from corruption, that Bol is targeting the minister. Okay. Bol is a member of parliament. So he has that professional right to do that, to question anyone. That's what MPs do. So I don't see any problem with that. I wouldn't say he targeted the minister. Now, the question I would ask Bol is, what did he use to determine Makuei? Because as I showed at the beginning, to give you the context, that South Sudan is a corrupt country and corruption is systemic. How did he select Michael Makuei? If he happened to come across the documents and then he started doing this, then we would expect that this is just the beginning and he's going to do that with other people who are corrupt within the system. Because if he stops with Makuei, then that is a problem. Then people who are, the surrogates, who are really angry now at Bol, can have a case, because that would be targeting an individual. So Bol has an obligation to explain how did he come to select Makuei. So, and if he's going to continue with other people, gets other documents, then that's not a problem. Now with Makuei, and if you can see, Makuei says he's not corrupt. If he says he's not corrupt as an individual, as a human being, he doesn't like to take something he's not, it doesn't belong to him, then I think he's right. And many people within South Sudan will say that they're not corrupt. But as someone who works within that system, and you use the methods within that system that are not within protocols, or if there are no protocols and you just do things anyhow, like requesting money from the gateway, money that should have gone to the Minister of Finance for other ministries, then that is a problem. That means you're corrupt. Are you corrupt willingly, or you're corrupt because you don't know how the system works? That's one of the things we don't know. But I do believe it's just because that's how they do things in South Sudan. So they think that's the right way. So they really wonder when you accuse them of corruption, because that's how the system works. So they don't see a problem with it. So Michael Makuei cannot say he's not corrupt when he's within that system. And he does acknowledge in that video that South Sudan is corrupt. And he's within that government that he's corrupt. But then again, we come to the case of Mading. Mading requested to be assisted, his company to be assisted directly. Now the question, is that the method that is used by other companies? Is that the protocol? So if that's the protocol, then we cannot blame Mading. Mading is just making use of available resources. We cannot blame Mading for standing, because he knows he's doing something that is within that ministry. So I don't think we can blame him when he requests this. So we can ask, is that how money is requested from the ministry? But we know that's how things are done in South Sudan. But here's the problem. When the minister sent a letter to the executive director of South Sudan International Gateway to give the money to Dolku Communications, here's where the problem is. The minister said that Mading, the company that Mading heads, has been contracted. He's saying that the company has been contracted to disseminate some information about the peace agreement in South Sudan, to go to all the 10 states and hold public or town hall meetings and talk to people about peace have some conversations, which is okay. Now, here's the problem. Any money that is given by the government to any private companies should always be done by tenders. So the question is to the minister, were there tenders that were sent out to South Sudan saying, we need companies to disseminate the peace agreement. So send in your tenders, and then the minister will sit and say, we have some funding that has been given to us by the Minister of Finance that has been allocated. So this money is not for salaries, this money is not for any contingency, this money was given to us specifically to disseminate peace information. So, and then all those companies will come and then they choose the best one. Did that happen? Was Dolco Communications selected after it was established that this is the best qualified? If not, then that's a problem with the minister. I wouldn't blame Madin if he doesn't know, but the minister has to answer to that. Now, we can also ask, was there something from the government of South Sudan that says the money that is being collected by the South Sudan International Gateway can be used for the dissemination of peace agreement? Is there something like that? Is this we don't know, and this is where we need answers, because if the government wants to have peace disseminated, it should be part of the agreement. So the presidency itself can give the money to the presidency, but in this case, it's the minister that is asking International Gateway to give the money to Dolco Communication. So you can see where the problem is. Now, all in all, if we say Madin and the minister are corrupt as part of the system, then I do say yes. They cannot avoid that. They are corrupt as part of the system. But can we blame them individually? No, we cannot, because the whole system is set up like that. So you cannot pick on Madin and the minister when the whole system is set up like that. If you go to any ministry, you find the same thing. So this is where I think Bol has a lot to answer for. It would appear you're targeting them if you cannot answer these things. But Madin cannot avoid that. It's just the system. You cannot say you're not corrupt when you're part of that system. And there's some questions. There were no tenders. Or there were tenders? Let us see. If Madin was given money because of that letter, when he sent the letter, the first letter to the minister, and then he was given the money, and then the minister said, okay, in order to sound okay, then I'll create this and say, oh, it's because he's going to disseminate the peace agreement. That would be a problem. So, as I said, this is the problem in South Sudan. So we cannot blame individuals, but at the same time, if you are within the system, then as Deval said, corruption is the system. And Madin works in the system. The same thing in Van Bol works within the system. But I want to end with a quote from Fanon, which is why I like what Bol is doing. So I think we cannot say Bol is targeting Michael Makuei, but he has to answer whether he has a criteria he used to pick Michael Makuei. So here's a quote from Frantz Fanon. It's from The Wretched of the Earth. It published in 1963. So he says, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, deliver its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. In underdeveloped countries, the preceding generations have both resisted the work or erosion carried out by colonialism and also helped in the maturation of the struggles of today. We must rid ourselves of the habit, now that we are in the thick of the fight, of minimizing the action of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension when considering their silence and passivity. They fought as well as they could with the arms that they possessed then. And if the echoes of the struggle have not resounded in the international arena, we must realize that the reason for this silence lies less in the lack of heroism than in the fundamentally different international situation of our time. It needed more than one native to say, "We had enough." More than one peasant rising crushed, more than one demonstration put down before we could today hold our own certain in our victory. And I do believe what Bol is doing is that. As a generation, people have to, rise out of obscurity, because we've been dominated by the older generation. We don't have a voice. So when people like Bol come out, that's something we should appreciate. When one person says, we had enough and this must stop. This may be the beginning. Who knows? But I'm ready to have a conversation with Bol about this, because I think this is a generational mission. That's where I would tell Bol, please don't stop. But as a public servant, I need to also pose some questions to you. All in all, here's the question. Mading and Michael Makuei, as part of the system that is not fixed, that's not streamlined, that doesn't follow protocols if they exist, then they are corrupt. There's no question about that, because they were not tenders. But if we look at South Sudan as a whole, then we cannot blame them. They cannot blame them. The other thing I wanted to end is also Mading is not taking that money for personal use, as Boy said. He's using this to provide services to the public. At least Mading is doing something. That's something we should appreciate. For those of you insulting Mading, look at what he's doing. Mading is good at what he's doing. I know Mading personally. We were part of New Sudan Vision. I know he has his weaknesses. He can be very emotional. He can very, single-minded. When he's decided on something, he doesn't change it. And I think the failure of New Sudan Vision has a lot to do with how he did things. But he's good at what he does. If I had a media project, I would contract Mading to do it, because he's good at what he does. So, but he's very emotional. Instead of contextualizing something in the way I've done so that he becomes emotional. So I think he's providing something to the public. We need to appreciate that. At least he took public money, but he's also providing some service to the country. So fixing South Sudan, you can see it is providing something. So he didn't just take it for his own personal use. Is there a fraction of the money he took from the state, that 316,000, that has gone to his personal use? Maybe there is, but at least he's doing something. Think about the rest in South Sudan have taken money, but they've done nothing. Just buying houses in foreign countries. Thank you.